Hello, everyone. Welcome to Earth Exchange Café in February of 2023. I'm Trebbe Johnson, and I'm here with Harriet Sams. We were originally going to be speaking today with Laura Schmidt, who is the co-founder with Amy Lewis Rowe of the Good Grief Network, but unfortunately, Laura is ill. And so Harriet and I are going to just step in and have a Radical Joy for Hard Times conversation. Kind of spontaneous and spur of the moment.
And so with that, I will invite us into the beautiful virtual cafe that we have. Well, the cafe that's now firmly rooted in the imaginal place that we've been sharing for years now. And as we enter in, we pull up the comfy chairs and we've got our hot chocolate or our ginger tea or whatever it is that we want. And we're going to settle in to hear a conversation between old friends and maybe recognize something about our own practice in what we hear and hear new things and explore the edges of everything in this conversation. And so we settle on in and just breathe and just for a moment feel the spirit of inspiration as it may guide us. The spirit of creativity. The spirit of wisdom. And the spirit of community and belonging. And may they bless us as we embark on having our chat. So with that, I would love to ask Trebbe, opening question about, well, what's new for you right now in your Radical Joy process, in what's coming up for you. And I'd love you to tell us a little bit about your book, Fierce Consciousness.
Okay, well, yes. As far as Radical Joy for Hard Times goes, the 14th annual Global Earth Exchange is coming up on June 17th. So we're all thinking about that. And we have beautiful little flags, like there's one behind Harriet there, a little red flag with a bird that some children in London are making this year. And in my personal life, also in the Rad Joy life, I have a new book, and it's called Fierce Consciousness, Surviving the Sorrows of Earth and Self. And it's 34 practices for living through hard times and not going crazy. And they're really unexpected. And they're not the normal kinds of things that you think you might see in a book like this, like adapting your diet or getting more exercise or things like that. So the chapters are the directions themselves. So for example, claim your superpower, punch through the avalanche, fight the angel and let her win. And I started writing this as a follow-up to my Radical Joy for Hard Times book about how we might develop certain practices to deal with climate change. And then COVID happened, and I realized that what I was doing really was applicable to a pandemic that was throwing everybody's lives in disorder. And then my husband died. And I realized that they had to do also with how do we get through personal crises, because all of these things, climate change is a personal crisis. COVID is a personal crisis, and we're all dealing with our own personal crises all the time. So I created this book, and it's just published. I'd hold it up for you, but I don't know where it is right now. It has a great cover. And I'm going to be doing a 22-city book tour around the US starting March 10th. And you can see where I'm going to be on my website, which is trebbejohnson.com, as well as the radicaljoy.org website. And it's like I'm going around the East and then all the way west to Seattle and down to LA. And it's quite a journey. So that's what I'm doing. And Harriet, my question to you is, what's Radical Joy for Hard Times looking like in your life right now?
Well, I haven't got a book coming out, but I can feel a book coming into fruition. With words, I think that the academic study that I'm doing feels very much like Radical Joy for Hard Times, and I'm about 2 years into that now, and hopefully the findings are going to be really insightful about potentially about how not everybody who is on in the study, but a couple of the people encounters were deliberately going to difficult and wounded sites, and how that sort of translates to a sense of some sort of therapeutic healing for themselves, and also an understanding of that landscape. So in that sense, I'm really enjoying looking at things in that kind of way. But I've been actually practicing something that I've been putting onto our Mighty network, which we have, and people who are watching this are very welcome to join up to that, where occasionally we do practices to try and encourage people to sort of just get out there and do the earth exchange, or some sort of gifting practice in the landscape that they find. And so I started doing a practice using the words of Radical Joy for Hard Times as prompts for me, and also to help me understand the narrative of what is the relationship of what I'm finding at the site. So it's been quite interesting, because radical was quite a difficult word, because I felt like I had to be quite radical in what I presented to the site. It had to feel a little bit edgy. It had to feel like it incorporated something radical. And then joy was just joy. It was playful, and so it was. It felt quite creative, and really beautiful collaboration between the land and me. Not so much a focus on the woundedness or the challenge. And then 4, I've just done 4, and that seems to be quite an easy one, because unfortunately when we moved into our house, our garden was quite badly shackled, I would say, and it just turns out that they'd underlaid all the flower beds with lines of plastic, like old fertilizer bags. And so there's just been this real suppression of the earth, literally, and the fecundity of the planet. And when I found that out, the word 4 was almost like a download. It just went, this is 4. And so I was literally sledgehammering things and reaping out all this stuff, this plastic and moving rocks, and just this word of 4. This is for the land. This is really like releasing the land. So yes, the next is hard, and then times. So, and what I love about it is the practice sort of it ferments for a little while in my mind, and so it's been just a really, really beautiful practice of getting to know the words and what they mean.
So that meant that story about your garden is fascinating. And when you work in the garden, how do you feel that is a Radical Joy for Hard Times practice? Because that's the question we're always asking ourselves, like how do we turn this into a practice so that it's just a part of everyday life, like, for example, picking up litter?
There's a revelation about it, perhaps, a moment where there's like just doing daily garden chores, and then, wow, this can be something that recognizes the relationship, I suppose, that I want it to change from how it is to how it will be. And so I suppose gardening, just general gardening, is quite a healing and calming and collaborative experience. But this feels much more like undoing suppression, undoing woundedness that doesn't look like woundedness. It looks like a nice manicured garden to the uninitiated eye, for want of a better phrase. So it was the digging deeper. It was, in fact, the excavation that that undisclosed this, uncovered this truth, and that then instantly made me think, this is a Radical Joy for Hard Times process. This is a wounded landscape. regardless of how it looks, this has got challenges, human-made challenges, and I'm going to release it, So
Yeah,
it's joyous. It's actually very joyous as well.
You're thinking of it as a suppressed or repressed soil. It really feels like that. It's like the previous owners kind of decided, well, a certain number of inches is good soil and acceptable soil, and underneath that we don't want that, so we're gonna block it. And so there's this dividing line, whereas as if weeds couldn't grow in a little, weeds grow everywhere. It's not going to stop weeds. So it's a curious practice. I've never heard anything like it.
Yeah, and as a novice gardener, I wasn't entirely sure that this was something that had been ever suggested. So I had to. So there's a sense of compassion as well. That there's an intention for what they think of as the right thing to do. Right. However that then is the radical part, I suppose, which is the great undoing of a behavioral pattern. So that's been very interesting. So yeah, that's where I am at. Also coming back to the UK has been really wonderful.
After 2 years in France, that you thought you might be spending the rest of your lives there.
Yeah, exactly. But as you know, things change, and part of understanding the process of working through such change is to hold oneself with compassion and understanding. And perhaps your book recognizes that as well, that you're fiercely conscious of that.
Yeah, the need to change. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And what I mean by fierce consciousness is that we go through hard times, and I know hard times in my life. We all have hard times in our lives, and you can't block them out, and they're going to affect you. And yet you have to live. You have to find a way to live, and you have to not just survive, but have that fierce consciousness of saying, what can I really do? How can I move forward? How can I be completely present for my feelings about the difficulty of this, but yet not think that I'm the center of the world and demanding attention? And how can I find creativity and beauty and joy and compassion and generosity, both to give and to receive in every aspect of my life? So that's what I mean by fierce consciousness. And it actually comes from a poem that I really love by the American poet Robinson Jeffers. And he's writing about a hawk perched on a rock. And he compares the kind of the energetic mien of each of them. And he says, bright power, dark peace, fierce consciousness joined with final disinterestedness. So the fierce consciousness of the hawk is blended compared with the final disinterestedness of the rock. So
yeah, how fascinating.
Yeah.
And did it feel then that the process of writing the book was answering those questions? How do you stay present to those challenges?
It was answering them, but it was interesting, and I didn't even realize until I read The Galleys when they came out, is that it's how I've been living my whole life. It's like I kind of tapped into how I myself have stayed alive and energetic and keeping going all my life. So that was, again, this should be obvious because writers write what they know, obviously, but that was a revelation to me. So I have a question for you. So Harriet and I know each other because we have a mutual friend named Lucy Hinton who lives in London. And Harriet has been bringing her children to our Global Earth Exchange every year, since I think the second one was when you and I met. So I'm really curious because how young people are relating to the climate change and to the many other challenges that we face with the the destruction of the earth in so many ways, with mineral extraction, pollution. We were just talking before we came on about this terrible train accident in Ohio. So how do you talk to your children and guide your children in the hurt places of the earth and in how to make beauty for them? I think this would be relevant to a lot of people.
Yeah, and just to firstly put a little caveat out there that I may not get it right. So, if anybody wants to hear me, it's not like a how-to, because each child is really different, and each child's understanding of the local challenges as well as the sort of meta challenges will change, and will be differently focused for each one. And I think that it's really key to understand that from the child's point of view as best as we can. I think I was doing earth exchanges, as you said, with kids, my children from very, very young. So just bringing them along on my backpack, or in the little thing behind me, and then onwards. It's got harder as they've got older, I will be honest. They get very disinterested very easily, but there's this sort of beautiful period of time where up to around about 10, 11 years old, where the children are just very immersed in the natural landscape, and they love making creative things. And so there's it feels like they're quite naturally into making shapes and doing the creative act. I've had to be aware of the landscape that I take them to on a health and safety level. For instance, one of the ones that I took the children to had old junk, old rubbish nearby, so you have to worry about things like picking up old bits of iron and things like that, making sure that they don't damage themselves. So providing gloves is important. And that I learned that actually it's probably easier and more practical to go to a place where there isn't a lot of rubbish. That's probably better for older people to do that, adults. And then just let their imagination run wild, because I think children don't understand the sort of geopolitical aspects of woundedness like we do, perhaps, as adults. They don't understand the economics of why a place has been polluted or whatever, but they do understand things like compassion for the animals that have been affected, or when they see a burnt, scorched patch of land and nothing can grow there anymore, so there are no flowers anymore, there are no worms in the ground, those sort of things. So actually bringing them into a conscious understanding of the mammalian, the animal living biosphere is really important, rather than talking to them about the mining industry, or the people who leachated into this landscape, or polluted sort of bodies. And I think that's actually really helpful for someone running an earth exchange with children, because it can bring us out of their fault, not my fault narrative. You just end up being really just compassionate about that place, those animals that can't live there, and animals that have died. So when I took them up to up on the North Pennines, where there was an old munitions depot for the Second World War, and they understood that there was mustard gas that had killed the sheep who had just innocently been nibbling at them because it was a pasture land. That sort of thing really resonates with children. And I think then holding compassionately that there are victims. It's not just the landscape. There are other victims to this kind of destruction. To your next question about, or sort of part of the question, which was about the climate change aspect for young people and how do we guide them. It's quite interesting, because there's a few people I know now who, especially in the last few years when the IPCC reports have become more desperate, more more urgent, have as adults felt a great deal of despair and helplessness and fear, and this kind of preparatory energy has lifted up. I don't want to use the word preppers because I know that has connotations, but that has unwittingly translated to the children. The children hear, oh God, the world's going to end, we're all going to, climate change is running away, and we're all going to toxify the world, and all those kind of challenges. And then there's this kind of heightened fear, and then there's this collapse where everybody suddenly goes, well, we still have to go to school, we still have to pay the bills, we still have to vote at the elections, and normal life kind of continues as well. When my daughter was 9, she had quite intense anxiety, and it coincided with the school strikes that Greta Thunberg was initiating, and she wanted desperately to go along to them. She wanted to be part of that, and that she heard that calling that the young people can be the change. But for her, on a personal psychological level, it made her very, very anxious. And so we decided, very Rad Joy in a way, so how best to work through this, not just shut the doors and go, it's somebody else's problem, don't think about it, but this is real for you, you're really thinking about it, you are being called by the young people of the world to be aware, what's the best way forward for you? And she said, words to the effect of, I just want to know what's going on. So we decided to set up a podcast, and you were interviewed, had a conversation with us, with other people from like Stop Ecocide, Katie Carr from Deep Adaptation, all sorts of really beautiful thinkers and feelers and educational thinkers. Just talk to her, and I think she ran it for only 10 episodes, but it really helped. It really helped, because it wasn't a don't you worry, we're the grown-ups and we can sort this. It was, yeah, we're worried too, we're doing this and you're amazing. And to have had that at such a young age has been really important to her. It doesn't mean that her anxiety hasn't disappeared. It's now coming more in a way, because now the school education system is talking quite a lot more about climate change in classes like geography, for instance. They're talking a lot about human impacts on the planet. And so she's back aware, but we can have that open discussion and talk about how do we work through this with our allies, really.
Yeah, and it makes me think of a couple of things when listening to you. One is, I was reading an article yesterday that was published, I don't know, 6 months ago or so in the New York Times, and it was about how climate change is becoming increasingly a subject of psychotherapy. And there was a story about a woman who lives in Oregon in the US, and she was so nervous about climate change. She was obsessed with it. She was worried about the future of her 2 children. And she sought out a therapist who specializes in helping people with climate anxiety. And at one point he said to her, yes, okay, there are going to be problems. There's going to be loss. There are going to be challenges, and life will go on. And it made me think, yes, people will continue to fall in love. They'll have friends, they'll laugh, people will die of ordinary causes. You'll have animals in your life, things will happen, and we will continue to live. It will not be all chaos and tragedy. And for this woman, hearing those possibilities, it just made her relax. It made her realize that she didn't have to be that obsessed with it. And another thing I was thinking about when you were talking about taking your children to these places was of something that I did with a group of young people school children who were, I think, ages maybe 11 to 14 a few years ago. And we went to this site in Pennsylvania. It's actually quite notorious. It's called Centralia, Pennsylvania, which is in a long, narrow coal mining area in Pennsylvania for many years. And there's an underground fire there that's been burning in this mine, and it's just burning through the coal. It's been burning for, I think, 50 or 60 years, a long time. And so the children were aware of that, of course. We were picking up litter as we went, but they were also fascinated because there would be places in the earth where there were holes and rocks around them, and you could put your hands over those holes and feel the heat coming through. And that was pretty amazing. It really was. It was an aspect of sort of discovery and whimsy and even play in a horribly damaged place. And I think children's perspective reminds us that it's not all one thing or the other. You're allowed to feel whimsy and delight when you're confronting a wounded place, and you're allowed to be aware of sorrow and anxiety if you're in a delightful place. We are not one-track minded people.
Yeah, that's absolutely, yeah. And I think children really help me definitely to understand that. And going back to what I was saying about the practice that I was doing, the joy for hard times, the joy, one of the little things that was going around in my mind was just be creative like a child. My understanding of that. What would the child do? The child wouldn't lament the destruction of the pathway, which was the context in which I was working in. The child would just be picking up beautiful stones and putting them in an order or in a chaos, whatever it is, and I think that's absolutely right. And it makes me think of who is it? There's a quote: the child fathers the man.
Oh yeah, is that Wordsworth? I think it was
Wordsworth. It's Wordsworth, yeah. Where we've all been children, but we've not all been grown-ups. I'm 44, but I've never been a 45-year-old. But we've all been a child, and that there's something in a childhood. If I look back onto my own childhood, because that child is older than me, as it were, they are my parent, and they teach me how to do these sort of things. And it's a shedding as well. It's a shedding of the narratives, a shedding of the assumptions that we've collected over the years, and the fear of collapse, the fear of destructions, and remembering that there's something quite joyous in that. It's not always obvious. I think that's really interesting, that whimsy and delight can come as well as sorrow and anxiety. And I think that's really interesting. Going back to what I'm studying about archaeotherapy, bringing people therapeutically or just in relational terms to challenge is so important, because it helps us all understand ourselves on an individual level, maybe something that we need to understand, but also on a collective level. And more than ever, we need to know that we have this terrible capacity for destruction and for subjugation, and on the West, in this westernized way of being, but we've also got this huge capacity for restoration and joy and collaboration. Yeah, and that's reassuring.
It's very reassuring. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I was thinking about this last night because we only found out yesterday that Laura couldn't be with us today, Laura Schmidt. And so then we decided to have this conversation. And so last night I was reading an article in a magazine I get about birds. And it was talking about how birds with very unusual characteristics, like an extremely long bill or extremely bright colors, because they occupy specific niches in the bird world, they're probably going to be more at risk from climate change than others. And I started reading this article, and then I just felt like I couldn't deal with it. Like, no, I don't want to know about this now. I know enough. And then I started reading it again because I was curious about why this was so. And then again, I just like, I can't, I just don't want to know this right now. But then that was kind of playing off against, well, I know enough. Like, I know enough to have this information in my mind, but I don't want to know anymore. And I didn't finish the article. I might finish reading it. But so, and then I became aware of my own kind of thought process, which I go through a lot actually with reading about the effects of climate change, of sort of like wanting to know something and then not wanting to know it, or wanting to know a little bit, but not wanting to know too much. And then whether I continue reading or not and informing myself, I still have an after effect of just feeling, just this sadness and despair. So, so I think I'm thinking about the taking care of the wounded places of the earth. That's my work. So if I'm having this reaction, I have to imagine that many other people, if not all people, are having the same reaction. So I wanted to ask you how you deal with it. How do you deal with all of this information personally?
Yeah, what you're saying, sort of, my image was of Pandora's box, that it's not just one event, it's there constantly, and we can keep opening it and shutting it, and according to how resilient, how self-compassionate, how much it's required. Sometimes there's a titillation to it that I think can be unhelpful, and by that I mean I just haven't got the resources to read about this right now, and so just for self-care and for self-resiliency, I'm not going to open Pandora's box. And then sometimes it's just like, I'm really ready, I'm stepping into this now, and I have allies around me who I know I can talk to, and who are, if I can't do things, I can support them for doing things on our collective behalf. And I think that there's an embeddedness and a belonging that I think has become, for me over the years, critical to being able to do this kind of work. And I've, and it manifests in lots of different ways, like, just talking to people like this, occasionally going and doing a little bit of CPD, professional development, where I'll go on a workshop, and just, I think that the itch that needs to be scratched is to just reassure myself that there are other people out there, and then being resourced to be able to look at challenges in a way, because I did my master's in green economy, which I say this to people, it's like, it was essentially, I was getting marks and trying to achieve while reading about the absolute worst stuff that's about to happen, and how horrible that was. It was a horrible feeling to be just given article after article after academic article to then try and get a good mark on, and then just be like, is this really what's just around the corner? You name it, mineral extraction and pollution, biodiversity collapses, hydrological, climate, the whole shebang. And then it took me about 2 or 3 years of retreat to incorporate that and to feel a sense of like, okay, now I can do something about it without falling to pieces. And my job, I think my role, I see it as supporting those who are activists, guiding people, giving them practices. Just hearing you before, I think sometimes when there is no option but to be present to and bearing witness to the worst crises, trauma, for instance, as you mentioned, the train accident in Ohio, which it basically just spilled tons and tons of toxic material into the Ohio River, which is then washed downstream and caused catastrophic damage to the biodiversity, but also to the 10 million people in the catchment area. And it's on its way, or has arrived at the Mississippi River, which has further massive implications. And so it's almost like these practices are there. We can chat about it when the electricity is working and we've got food on the table, so that we know that we can do these things in those challenging environments with those challenged communities when it's needed. And I think that's something extremely important. And that we're not alone doing this. There's lots of other people doing in some way a similar sort of thing. The way they do it may be different, but the essence is very similar, which is it's about bearing witness, about showing belonging, about keening, in the old word, that you keen with grief, and then we work through it and find something that feels like love, and love for land, love for community. So yeah, it's Radjoy. I think it has become absolutely pivotal. I would say it's up there with finding my community who on a human level, and the land. Wow, walking the land is just something I have to do every day, to just say I'm here, I belong, I hope I belong to you, I'm here. And then the Radjoy little pockets of practice, just it keeps me going.
Yeah, and that example of the train on the Ohio River is already such a wounded place. And there was a Radical Joy for Hard Times member, whose name is Joanne Martin, and she lives on the Ohio River. And she they were building a huge petrochemical plant not far from where she lives, like massive, and the biggest one in North America. And it's all about getting natural gas from all the gas fracking that's happening in Pennsylvania. This is Pennsylvania, and turning it into plastic, like the things that you use once, like a carrier bag, and then they're thrown out. And what she did after going through several years of fighting and despair was she started this program to build green industry in that area, like solar panels and healthy ways of living. And they've gotten grants, and it's just really taken off. And I think it's so inspiring. I mean, most of us aren't even capable. Like, there is no way in the world I could ever organize anything like that. But it's an example of how, even in really awful, challenging circumstances, there are ways of finding to not go crazy. And like, for example, with this train wreck that you're talking about, this trains carrying massive chemicals, all different kinds of very, very toxic chemicals, derailed, and there was an instant fire, and then one of the train cars was about to explode, and so they put more fire on that to burn off the chemicals. And because the alternative would be that the car would explode and send metal all over the place for hundreds of miles. So at this stage, you can't go into an area like that and say, well, let's look for some radical beauty right now. I mean, it's a life and death situation right now. The kind of support people need is information and help, and where are they going to stay, and how are they going to get enough water to drink. But after a while, that's when we can come in and say, how do we give some love back to this poor land and to the people who feel so aggrieved by what's happened to it?
Yeah, and I think that's really beautiful and important as well. I think we've touched on it over the years, about how the process of love, love as it's manifests through the practice, the Radjoy practice, can be seen in different ways. So, is there an immediate kind of practice that can be done, or does it require nothing more than just bearing witness, just to be there with blankets, with cups of tea, with helping make cordons for the land that's not safe to step into. That there's those sort of very practical, radical joy practices that can be done. And then moving into longer term, there's the creative side of things that we really always enjoyed, seeing how beautiful people's creativity can be in these places that are further down the road. And I think there's a place for it all, which is what is so special about this kind of practice. It is, for the hard time is both acute and chronic. And that's really important to remember, and it gives the practice meaning, I think, so that it can it can do what it needs to do. And it's a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful thing. And I'm just thinking, really, moving into the future, you've got your Fierce Consciousness tour, but then you mentioned that we've got the 14th Global Earth Exchange in June, the 14th on the 14th, so it's easy to remember. And what ideas have you got right now about what the focus might be, or are we unfocused at the moment?
Well, what I've been thinking about, I got this idea because I was invited to be part of a canoeing trip in a canyon in Utah in October. And in thinking about the theme for that, I thought about, it's very, it's absolutely Radical Joy for Hard Times related. It's like both grieving and praising the land, both exulting in what's beautiful about it and acknowledging what's not so beautiful about it. And I think that might be a good theme for the Global Earth Exchange this year. Not only looking for what's, not only for going to wounded places, which we always do, which is what the theme of the Global Earth Exchange is, and Radical Joy for Hard Times, but also saying what is beautiful here. And there's a Mayan author named Martín Prechtel who's written several books. And one of them is The Smell of Rain on Dust, which is such a wonderful title. It evokes that smell for me. And he talks about grief and praise. And he says, if you don't grieve for the land, you're not truly praying for it, praising it. And if you don't praise it, you're not prepared to grieve for it, because it's that depth in our hearts that we feel for the places and the species and the plants and the animals that we love. That defines our relationship with it. So I think, and that's in our title, as you brought it up, that's in our title, Radical Joy for Hard Times. So let's just bring that out. Let's talk about, and let's talk to the place itself. Let's tell the place how sorry we are about what's happened to it. And let's also tell it how beautiful it is and what it means to us. So that's what I'm thinking. And, the Global Earth Exchange, we started that in 2010 as a way of just launching the organization, which was then about a year old. And people on 7 continents participated and went to wounded places and made beauty. And from scientists in Antarctica to farmers in Bali and teachers in California. And so we made it a yearly event. So, and this will be the 14th one. What do you think of that idea?
I love that idea. I love what you said about grief is praise, and I wonder if people would resonate with that actually, because there's the wide opening when we're all sort of somnambulant and we're just going about our daily lives and we're going, yes, I know there's crises, but I've got to pay the mortgage and I'm busy, and then something happens, on a collective scale, like the COVID pandemic. Everybody suddenly was grieving for what had passed, but also individual grieving for loss of loved ones, and worrying about people, and then also all the other ways that people have grieved. And there's this opening, and in tradition, many traditions, people who are grieving are closer to the other world. This is a very strong tradition in the Irish tradition as well. That they are, there's certain things that you can't do. You can't stand on their threshold. You can't wash, or these sort of things, because you're so raw to the other world. And I think that there's something very much about when we open our eyes to just how beautiful even the woundedness, the beauty, the abundance, the offerings the earth gives us, we see it more when we've stepped at grief's door or gone through it. And I just, I think that's very powerful, you know, that release, the smell of the rain on dust is a release. It's like, I've been holding, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, all this pain, and then it rains. And I think there's something very beautiful in that as well, that we could potentially work with, maybe. Yeah.
So I wanted to,
go on.
okay, well, I'll ask you this first. I wanted to, what I have really admired about your whole approach to radical joy for hard times over the years is that for you, it's really become a regular practice. I mean, and it is for me too. Like it's you notice wounded places, and when you notice a wounded place, you have to stop and make a little gift of beauty for it. And you just do that. And something that you did a few months ago when you were still in France, I thought was kind of an amazing experience, and it had to do with fence posts. And I wonder if you would tell that story.
Yeah, I wonder, while I'm telling this, you can find the picture, because that might help people see.
I'll do my best. I'm not great at screen sharing, but I will look.
So well, it'll be on the Radical Joy Revealed, I think, last time. So you can just
that's true. Okay.
Yeah. So what I struggled, to be absolutely honest, I struggled with the challenges of France, just as on a personal level. And one of the struggles that I was really finding difficult was there's a lot of electric fences in the area that we were in, where there was quite a jolt if you went near it. And my dog, poor thing, did it on her nose once and then just wouldn't go near at all. So really scared. And there's this sense of exclusion. So there was these beautiful landscapes, but you were excluded from it, like literally excluded. And the threat of the violent approach to this kind of land was really difficult for me. I am quite a sort of chronic trespasser. I shouldn't really say that on the internet, but I do generally like to go off piste a lot. And so I really struggled with that. And then after a while of this kind of exclusivity feeling and not feeling very happy about it at all, I actually then started taking notice of the posts, and they were split logs. So very straightforward, you know, just a birch or oak or, beech, and it just literally been split down the middle, and then put the post along the track or along the side of the field. And they were themselves beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So, just imagine all of the different biodiversity. The top was covered in mosses and lichens and all these beautiful little interesting, intricate little sort of miniature geoscapes. But then also there were ivy weaving around them, or the cows couldn't get quite to the back of them. So there were clumps of all this beautiful grass where spiders were safely weaving their webs. There was vetch was growing, and just little bursts of color, and it was just really beautiful. And then the wood themselves, of course, were and there was ash in there and oak, and so they were changing it over time as well. So the colors of this wood was absolutely beautiful as well. And so I took some photos, which Trebbe's trying to find.
Yeah, and it's the website where they are on is having some kind of difficulty, so I'm not sure this is going to be possible.
Yeah, so never mind. But it was such a deep comfort to me. It was almost like, look what can still be found. Look what can still thrive in what I would perceive to be a threat. And that was a really important message, a really important teaching for me. And so, yeah, I took some photos, and then a friend said, oh, you should do an oracle card set, which I was thinking it might be a bit of a stretch, but there was something about it. I could have been like a train spotter and just collected photo after photo of all these incredible living posts, and it was very meaningful to me and very comforting. So yeah. That was
Well, it
that
was
good.
also, I mean, it was like, it was such an example to me of seeing something that you weren't expecting to see. You know, like your consciousness and your senses were attuned to something else. But then all of a sudden the fence posts, which had been there all along, they just kind of jumped into view and like, look at me, look at me. And so you did.
Yeah, and the change, it was the shift in awareness and attention that I think is really beautiful. It was beautiful, you know, from, oh, I don't like this, this is counter to everything that I believe in myself, to suddenly being not part of the conversation at all. It was all about these posts. And I think that if there's ever an analogy of what learning to belong in a challenging world, it helps us to see that if we live in a challenged world, whether we're in a cityscape or a rural environment, or subject to an ecological disaster or anything like that, there's something about turning our attention towards something other than the perceived difficulty. And I don't say that lightly, because of course people are having no choice to live in extremely difficult circumstances, and that was for me a sort of light-hearted version of me not wanting electric fences in my lives. But I do recognize that there's a lot of very difficult circumstances out there right now for humans, and for animals that simply cannot avoid these challenging places. And yeah. I think that, Trebbe, you as you was mentioning, there's been places around the world who have undertaken the Rad Joy practice and taken great comfort in it.
I'm trying to be able to show you this picture. Do you see this?
Yeah, we can see that.
You can see the fence posts.
Yes.
There are Harriet's amazing fence posts. Each one with a personality all its own. What there, ivy growing up them. Yeah.
The splits, that sort of, I'm not perfect, but I'm doing my job as best I can.
Yeah.
We can all appreciate that kind of. I'm slowly becoming a decrepit thing that's going to return to the earth, and then they'll replace me. But this is who I am right now, and there's a lot of meaning in that.
Now I'm trying to get back to Zoom again. I can't seem to be able to do this.
Okay, so you just stop sharing. Can you see at the top?
Oh yes, thank you. There we are.
Yeah. So yeah. So
well, I wanted to say one more thing, huh? I just wanted to say one more little thing about the circumstances of so many people's lives, and that is that that after there is some kind of disaster or crisis, we always love to hear stories about people who do extraordinary things for other people, and I think that's it. There is that genuine need to come out of ourselves in crisis situations. I just read a book by Rebecca Solnit called A Paradise Built in Hell. And she looks at 5 or 6 communities that have had terrible disasters, earthquakes, major fires, and 9/11 in New York City, hurricanes. And she writes about the kinds of ways that people have stepped up from the very moment to help one another. And not only in practical ways like providing food, but people sitting around at night and playing the guitar and singing together when they don't even have a place to live. There is that aspect of the human spirit that wants to do that, that wants to find a way to come together and make the best out of something and overcome what's wrong.
Yeah. And that's a perennial thing. I remember reading an article about after what happened with 9/11, when they diverted some of the planes to, I think, airports in Canada, and how those people were suddenly found in the wrong place, they didn't know anyone, they were, you know, and people just gave them all of this support, gave them food, gave them places to stay. Then, you know, they're not, it wasn't in the, you know, ground zero, it wasn't that focal point, but there are other gifts of kindness, just gentle gifts to help a very difficult situation. And I think that a book like that is really, it's so important to remember that there are always stories of beauty and giving and kindness around the edges of tragedy and of difficulties. And yeah, it's important to remember that it goes back to what you were saying about the psychotherapist, you know, that when it can sometimes feel absolutely overwhelming, that there's no way through, but there is, and that there's something on the other side that's very important to hold on to. And just finally, I suppose we've only got a few minutes, but I just want to ask again about fierce consciousness and what's how you feel about it. And
I like it. That's nice to say when you hold your book in your hand and you read through it and you say, I really like this. And I think that's really the underlying message of that book, is that no matter what we're going through, we can always find and make beauty. And I just have found that my entire life, you know, that no matter how bad things get, you can always find and make beauty in a simple way, by giving to somebody else, by opening up to receive from others. You know, just as a simple example, when my husband was in the hospital, and the day we got the diagnosis that he only had a very, very short time to live, and I went outside the hospital, it was August, it was hot, and I just said, I need help right now. And there was this rose bush right by the front door, and I walked across this little strip of grass and smelled the roses. And it was like, the roses were just doing what they did. They were being beautiful and fragrant, and they were a blessing. They were a gift. They were beauty in hard times. So that it's always possible if we just have that kind of consciousness.
that feels like a perfect place to end a really rich.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Exploration.
I'm glad we did this. Yeah, I'm sorry that Laura can't make it, and I hope we're going to have Laura back again. And on March 15th, we can announce our guest. You want to tell us about Amber?
Yes. So, well, we're from March, April, and May. We're going to June. We are hosting the Spirit Spring. Is that what we're calling it? Or where we're talking to spiritual leaders of different faith practices. And our first guest, I'm very excited to say, is Ema Burke, who's the chosen chief of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, which is an international organization all about sort of earth-based spirituality. So we're so excited about talking to her about an earth-based spirituality approach to these sort of difficult times and landscapes that we find ourselves in. So that's on the 15th of March, the Ides of March. And so with that, I think perhaps we should finish our conversation and close the doors of the cafe. But before we do, we just thank everybody for being here, pulled up their comfy chair and drank their cups of tea, and thanks to everyone for chipping in. Thanks for the comments on the Facebook page already, but there'll be YouTube comments where you can put your comments in there. And so we're going to close the door, turn the lights out, and say see you next time.
Bye, Harriet. Bye, everyone.
Bye.